Most people believe a new year has power simply because the number changes. They believe that somehow overnight motivation will arrive, clarity will appear, and discipline will feel easier. But the truth is, a year has no power of its own. A year is just time passing. What gives a year meaning is not the calendar. It's the reason you decide to show up differently. That's why 2026 matters. Not because it's new, not because it's clean, but because this can be the year you finally answer a question most people avoid their entire lives. Why are you doing what you're doing without a clear reason? People drift. They work hard, but they don't feel fulfilled. They stay busy, but they don't feel proud. They chase goals, but when they reach them, they still feel empty. And then they wonder what went wrong. Nothing went wrong. They just never started with why. When you don't know why you want something, you rely on motivation. And motivation is unreliable. It disappears the moment things get difficult. The moment progress slows, the moment life pushes back. But when you know your why, motivation becomes irrelevant. You don't wake up asking, do I feel like doing this today? You wake up knowing this matters. That's the difference between people who start strong and people who finish strong. Most people begin a year focused on outcomes. More money, better body, bigger success, more recognition. And while outcomes are important, they are not inspiring. Outcomes don't carry you through doubt. Outcomes don't guide decisions when no one is watching. Meaning does. Your why is not about what you want to achieve. It's about why achieving it matters to you and to others. Because success without meaning feels hollow, and progress without purpose feels exhausting. That's why so many people quit halfway through the year. They didn't quit because they were incapable. They quit because they were disconnected. They were chasing someone else's defini, son of success. Someone else's timeline, someone else's dream. 2026 becomes your year when you stop copying goals and start choosing purpose. When you stop asking, what should I do, and start asking, what do I believe? Because when your actions are aligned with what you believe, consistency becomes natural. You don't need reminders. You don't need pressure. You don't need fear. You move, be, because not moving would feel wrong. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Finding your why requires honesty. It requires you to confront the gap between who you say you want to be and how you actually live. It requires you to admit that some of the things you've been chasing don't truly matter to you. That's hard, but clarity always begins with discomfort. Your why isn't about being perfect. It's about being intentional. It's about waking up each day knowing that even the smallest action is connected to something bigger than convenience or comfort. That even on hard days, there's a reason to keep going. When people have a clear why, they don't need external validation. They don't need applause. They don't need permission. They are driven by alignment, not approval. And that's powerful. Because the world doesn't need more people who are busy. It needs more people who are clear. Clear about what they stand for. Clear about what they're willing to sacrifice. Clear about what they will no longer tolerate from themselves. 2026 is not your year because everything will go right. It's your year because you will finally know why you're willing to endure when things go wrong. The difference between wishful thinking and real commitment. A goal says, I want this. A why says, this is who I am becoming. And once identity enters the equation, everything changes. You don't try to be disciplined. You act like someone who values discipline. You don't try to be consistent. You behave like someone who keeps promises to themselves. You don't try to be confident. You make choices that earn self-respect. This is how real transformation begins. Not with force, but with belief. So before you plan the year, before you write goals, before you set deadlines, ask yourself one question and answer it honestly. Why does this matter to me? Because when you get that answer right, 2026 won't just be another attempt. It will be the year your actions finally make sense. People believe their biggest obstacle is lack of opportunity. They believe if they had better circumstances, better support, or better timing, everything would finally fall into place. But when you look closely at the lives of people who actually change their trajectory, you notice something different. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't wait for fairness. They didn't wait for perfect conditions. They took responsibility. Responsibility is not about blame. And that's where many people get it wrong. Blame looks backward. Responsibility looks forward. Blame says, this happened to me. Responsibility says, what will I do about it? That shift is small in language, but massive in impact. Because the moment you take responsibility, you reclaim control. Life will never be fair. Some people start ahead. Some people start behind. Some people face obstacles others will never understand. And acknowledging that reality is not weakness, it's honesty. But staying there is a choice. And that choice has consequences. People who remain stuck often sound logical. They have reasons, they have explanations, they can clearly articulate why something didn't work, and they're usually right. But being right doesn't move your life forward. Responsibility is the moment you decide that explanations no longer matter as much as outcomes, that your future is too important to be held hostage by your past. This doesn't mean you ignore pain. It doesn't mean you deny injustice. It means you refuse to let those things define what's possible next. When you take responsibility, uncomfortable happens, you lose excuses, and excuses are comforting. They protect your ego, they soften failure, they give you something to point at when things don't go your way, but they also keep you small. Responsibility demands ownership over things you didn't cause but still have to deal with. It asks you to carry weight you didn't ask for, and that's not fair, but it is powerful. Use the people who grow the most are not the ones with the fewest problems. They are the ones who stop outsourcing control over their lives. They stop saying if they would change. They stop saying when the system improves. They stop saying once things calm down. And they start saying, what can I do today with what I have? That question changes everything. When you take responsibility, your language changes. You stop saying they won't let me and start saying I haven't figured it out yet. You stop saying this always happens to me and start saying what pattern am I repeating? That level of honesty is uncomfortable. But it's also liberating because responsibility gives you agency, and agency builds confidence, not the loud performative kind of confidence, but the cool IET kind. The kind that comes from knowing that no matter what happens, you will respond with intention instead of reaction. People who avoid responsibility often confuse it with self-blame. They think owning everything means criticizing themselves endlessly. But responsibility is not about punishment. It's about empowerment. It's about recognizing that while you may not control the starting POI, in T, you do control the direction. Every time you take responsibility, you send yourself a message, I can be trusted. And self-trust is the foundation of discipline. You don't need willpower when you trust yourself. You don't need external pressure when you know you'll follow through. That's why responsibility changes behavior more than motivation ever could. Motivation is emotional, responsibility is structural. Motivation comes and goes. Responsibility stays. In 2026, the question is not whether challenges will appear. They will. The question is whether you will meet them as a victim of circumstance or as an owner of outcomes. Ownership doesn't mean you succeed every time. It means you learn every time. It means you stop waiting for life to be easier and start becoming stronger. And something interesting happens when you live this way. People begin to trust you, not because you're perfect, but because you're consistent. You don't deflect. You don't disappear. You don't make excuses. You take the hit, adjust, and move forward. That's leadership. Leadership is not a title, it's behavior. And the first person you are called to lead is yourself. 2026 becomes your year, You stop negotiating with your standards. When you stop lowering expectations to protect comfort. When you stop explaining why you couldn't and start proving how you can. Responsibility is not glamorous. It doesn't get applause. It doesn't feel good in the moment. But over time, it builds something far more valuable than comfort. It builds character. And character is what carries you when everything else falls apart. So if you want 2026 to be different, don't ask for less weight. Ask for stronger shoulders. Because the moment you take full responsibility for your life, without excuses, without conditions, is the moment your future finally starts listening to you. Most people believe change requires a dramatic moment, a breakthrough, a surge of motivation that flips a switch and suddenly turns everything around. They wait for that moment because it feels powerful. It feels inspiring. It feels like the kind of story people like to tell. But real change almost never happens that way. Real change is quiet. It's repetitive. And most of the time it feels unimpressive. That's why so many people underestimate it. They confuse intensity with progress. They believe if they feel fired up, if they push hard for a short period of time, results should follow. And when they don't, discouragement sets in. Not because they failed, but because their expectations were wrong. Intensity feels productive. Consistency is productive. Anyone can do something once. Anyone can do something when they feel inspired. But progress is built by people who show up even when there is no emotion. Our reward, consistency is not about doing more. It's about doing what matters again and again. Small actions don't feel powerful in the moment. Skipping one unhealthy choice doesn't feel like transformation. Reading a few pages doesn't feel like mastery. Taking one disciplined step doesn't feel like success. But compounded over time, these small actions become identity. And identity is what sustains success. The reason most people struggle with consistency is not because they lack discipline. It's because they expect consistency to feel exciting. They expect it to feel new. But by definition, consistency is repetitive. And repetition is boring. That's not a flaw. That's the point. Because boredom is where commitment is tested. Consistency asks a simple but uncomfortable question, Every day, will you do the right thing even when no one is watching? And every time you say yes, something important happens. You strengthen trust with yourself. You reinforce the belief that you are someone who follows through. And self-trust is far more valuable than motivation. Motivation is emotional. Consistency is behavioral. Motivation says, I feel like it. Consistency says, I said I would. And the difference between those two sentences is the difference between temporary effort and lasting change. Most people quit not because the goal is too hard, but because the process is too ordinary. They don't see immediate results, so they assume nothing is happening. But progress is often invisible before it becomes undeniable. Think about growth. You don't see it day by day. You notice it in hindsight. You notice it when something that once felt difficult now feels natural. You notice it when your reactions change, when your standards rise, when your default behavior improves. That's the power of consistency. It reshapes who you are without making a lot of noise. In 2026, you don't need extreme plans. You don't need to overhaul your entire life in 1 month. You need a few clear behaviors that you are willing to repeat regardless of mood. Because consistency removes decision fatigue. When something becomes a habit, it no longer requires debate. It becomes automatic. And automation is how discipline becomes sustainable. People who rely on intensity burn out. People who rely on consistency build endurance. Endurance is what carries you through setbacks. Because setbacks are inevitable. You will miss days. You will make mistakes. You will fall short of your own standards at times. Consistency is not perfection. It's resilience. It's the ability to return to the behavior without self-judgment, without drama, without quitting. That's why consistency is an act of self-respect. Every small action is a vote for the person you want to become. And when you see asked that vote repeatedly, identity follows. You don't become confident by thinking about confidence. You become confident by keeping small promises. You don't become disciplined by wanting discipline. You become disciplined by practicing follow through. You don't become successful by chasing success. You become successful by building reliable systems. Systems beat goals because systems show up very day. In 2026, the advantage will not belong to the most talented or the most motivated. It will belong to the most consistent. The person who chooses progress over excitement. The person who understands that doing something small today is more powerful than planning something big tomorrow. Consistency doesn't look impressive at first, but over time, it becomes unstoppable. And one day, P will call it overnight success. They'll never see the quiet mornings, the repeated effort, the days you showed up with no applause, but you'll know, and that knowledge changes how you walk, how you speak, how you decide. Because when consistency becomes part of who you are, success is no longer something you chase. It becomes something you expect because you've earned it. Most people end their lives trying to avoid discomfort. They make decisions based on what feels safe, familiar, and predictable. They choose paths that minimize risk, reduce tension, and protect their sense of certainty. And for a while, that strategy works. Life feels manageable, stable, comfortable. But comfort has a hidden cost. Comfort keeps you where you are. Growth, by definition, requires change. And change always brings discomfort. That discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong, it's a sign that something is different. Yet most people interpret it as danger. They pull back the moment things feel uncertain. They retreat the moment fear shows up. Not because they are weak, but because they misunderstand the signal. Discomfort is not the enemy. Discomfort is the price. Every meaningful improvement in life demands it. Learning something new, speaking up, taking responsibility, setting boundaries, leaving what no longer fits, becoming who you say you want to be. None of those things feel comfortable at first. The problem is we've been conditioned to believe that if something feels hard, we must be doing it wrong. We look for reassurance. We wait for confidence to arrive before we act. But confidence doesn't come first. Action does. Discomfort is often the gap between who you are and who you're becoming. And that gap will never feel easy. It stretches you. It challenges your identity. It forces you to question patterns that once felt normal. That's why so many people retreat when they are closest to growth. The discomfort intensifies right before change takes hold. And without understanding that, people turn back, assuming they've reached their limit. They've reached the edge of their comfort zone. Growth requires you to sit in that space without running from it, to resist the urge to numb it, distract from it, or escape it, because on the other side of discomfort is clarity. When you lean into discomfort, you learn what you're capable of. You discover strengths you didn't know you had. You build tolerance for uncertainty. And tolerance for uncertainty is what creates confidence. Not the loud kind, the grounded kind, the kind that doesn't need guarantees. In 2026, discomfort will show up. It will appear as doubt, fear, resistance, and impatience. It will whisper that you're not ready, not qualified, not prepared enough. And Those moments you'll be tempted to delay, to wait, to retreat, but discomfort is not asking you to stop, it's asking you to grow. Every time you choose the uncomfortable action, instead of the familiar one, you expand your capacity. And capacity compounds. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. What once felt impossible becomes normal. This is how progress actually works. Discomfort doesn't disappear, it evolves. The discomfort of starting is replaced by the discomfort of improving. The discomfort of learning is replaced by the discomfort of responsibility. And eventually, the discomfort of fear is replaced by the discomfort of staying the same. That last one is the most important. Because there comes a point where staying where you are becomes more painful than moving forward. And when that happens, change becomes inevitable. People who grow don't have less fear. They have more clarity about which discomfort is worth enduring. They understand that short-term discomfort leads to long-term strength, while short-term comfort leads to long-term regret. That awareness changes decision-making. You stop asking, what feels easiest, and start asking, what leads to growth. You stop chasing relief and start choosing meaning. Discomfort, when approached with intention, becomes a teacher. It reveals where your edges are. It shows you what you've been avoiding. It highlights the skills you need to develop next. Avoiding it delays growth. Facing it accelerates it. In 2026, the goal is not to eliminate discomfort. The goal is to become someone who can handle it. Who doesn't panic when things feel uncertain. Someone who understands that discomfort is temporary, but growth is lasting, because every level of your life will demand a new level of you. And the transition between those levels will always feel uncomfortable. That's not a flaw in the process. That is the process. So when discomfort shows up, don't label it as failure. Don't interpret it as a warning sign. Recognize it for what it is. Proof that you are stretching beyond who you were. And that stretch, uncomfortable, uncertain, demanding, is exactly where transformation lives. If 2026 is going to be your year, it won't be because it was easy. It will be because you chose growth over comfort. And that choice, repeated often enough, changes everything. Most people chase the future, as if it's something external, a promotion, a lifestyle, a version of success they can point to and say, when I get there, everything will make sense. They believe the future is a reward waiting at the end of hard work, but the future doesn't work that way. The future is not something you arrive at, it's something you become. And that's where most people get stuck. They want outcomes without identity. They want results without responsibility. They want the reward without becoming the person capable of sustaining it. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. If you achieve a future you're not prepared for, you will lose it. Not because you're unlucky, but because you haven't grown into it. Every level of success demands a matching level of character. That's why some people get what they want and still feel unfulfilled. They changed their circumstances, but not themselves. Their habits stayed the same, their mindset stayed the same, the IR standards stayed the same, so the future couldn't stay. The future always follows identity. Before the recognition comes discipline, before the influence comes integrity, before the results come responsibility. In 2026, the question is not what do I want to achieve? The real question is who must I become to deserve it? Because deserving is not about worth, it's about readiness. Becoming is not glamorous. It doesn't show up in highlights or announcements. It happens in the small decisions you make when no one is watching, in the boundaries you enforce, in the habits you protect, in the standards you refuse to compromise. Identity is built through behavior. Every time you choose the harder right over the easier wrong, you shape who you are. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you reinforce your self-image. And every time you walk away from something that conflicts with your values, you strengthen your foundation. This is how future-proof lives are built. People who focus only on goals are fragile. When the goal is delayed, motivation collapses. When the goal is achieved, direction disappears. But people who focus on identity always know what to do next, because they are guided by who they are becoming, not just what they want. That's why lasting success looks boring from the outside. It's not driven by urgency, it's driven by alignment. When your actions match your values, effort feels meaningful, sacrifice feels intentional, and discipline stops feeling like punishment. You're no longer forcing yourself to do the work. You're expressing who you are. In 2026, becoming the person who deserves the future you want means raising your standards quietly and consistently. It means doing things the right way, even when shortcuts are available. I means choosing long-term respect over short-term approval, and that requires patience. Identity doesn't change overnight, it compounds, slowly, invisibly, until one day people notice a difference and call it confidence, leadership, or success. But it was built long before it was seen. Becoming also requires letting go. You can't carry old behaviors into a new future. You can't hold on to habits that contradict who you're trying to be. And letting go often feels like loss before it feels like growth. But what you release makes space for what you're becoming. The future you want is not impressed by intention. It responds to consistency. It responds to behavior repeated long enough to become belief. And belief is powerful because when you believe in who you are becoming, you stop negotiating with yourself. You stop asking, should I? And start saying, this is what I do. That shift eliminates hesitation. It simplifies decisions. It builds momentum. In 2026, success will not chase you because you want it badly enough. It will come because your habits, values, and behavior align with it. That alignment is rare, and that's why it works. The world doesn't reward potential. It rewards reliability, and reliability comes from identity. So if you want 2026 to truly be your year, don't obsess over the outcome. Obsess over the person you are becoming. Build the habits that future version of you would have. Make the decisions they would make. Hold the standards they would hold. Do that long enough, and the future won't feel like a leap. It will feel like a natural next step. Because when you become the person who deserves the future you want, the future has no choice but to meet you there. As we bring this message to a close, remember this truth. 2026 is not powerful because it is new. It is powerful because you can be new. Not reinvented overnight, not transformed by motivation, but reshaped through intention, responsibility, consistency, courage, and character. This year becomes yours the moment you stop waiting for clarity and start acting with purpose. When you know why you are doing what you are doing, confusion loses its grip. Your actions gain direction. Your effort gains meaning. You stop drifting and start deciding. It becomes yours when you take responsibility, not for everything that happened, but for everything that happens next. When excuses no longer protect you and ownership no longer scares you, responsibility gives you control, and control gives you momentum. From that moment on, your life is no longer something that happens to you. It becomes something you actively shape. It becomes yours when you choose consistency over intensity. When you understand that small actions repeated daily will outlast any burst of motivation. When you show up even when it feels ordinary. When progress fails invisible. And when no one is watching. Because that is where identity is built, and identity is what carries success. It becomes yours when you stop running from discomfort and start recognizing it as a signal of growth. Discomfort is not a warning sign. It is proof that you are stretching beyond who you were. Every uncomfortable decision you make today expands your capacity for tomorrow. Growth was never meant to feel easy. It was meant to feel meaningful. And finally, 2026 becomes yours when you commit to become the person who deserves the future you want. When you stop chasing outcomes and start building character, when your habits, standards, and values align with the life you say you want to live. Because the future does not respond to intention, it responds to identity. This is not about perfection. You will stumble, you will doubt yourself. You will have days where discipline feels heavy. But progress has never required flawlessness. It requires return. The willingness to come back again and again to the person you're choosing to become. So don't ask if 2026 will change your life. Decide that you will change your life in 2026. Choose purpose over comfort. Choose responsibility over excuses. Choose consistency over motivation. Choose growth over fear. Do that, and 2026 will not just be your year, it will be the year you became unstoppable.